Sapiens, by Yuval Noah. This summary is brought to you by Hook My Book. In this book, the author discusses our history from the pre-agriculture era till the scientific revolution. He discusses how and why our ancestors started farming, invented writing, cultures, empires and money. The Big Bang happened about 13.5 billion years ago. Matter, energy, and space came into existence. About 300,000 years after the Big Bang, atoms and molecules began to combine. About 3.8 billion years ago, on Earth, certain molecules combined to form organisms. About 70,000 years ago, humans started to form cultures. The three important revolutions that shaped the course of history are the cognitive revolution, the agricultural revolution, and the scientific revolution. The humans on Earth have had many different species of relatives that lived alongside them. Some of these species were very large, others were small. Some were suited to living in cold climates, while others were suited to living in warm climates. About 2 million years ago, some humans left East Africa and journeyed to different parts of the world. Cost of thinking. Humans have unusually large brains, which require lots of energy to function. This may have been a disadvantage in earlier eras when humans were hunting and gathering, as their muscles may have atrophied because of the increased energy demands. In Homo sapiens, the brain accounts for about 2 to 3% of total body weight, but it consumes 25% of the body's energy when the body is at rest. By comparison, the brains of other apes require only 8% of rest time energy. Additionally, because humans walk upright, their hips are narrower than those of primates, meaning that childbirth is more dangerous for them. Humans have started hunting animals using brain power, and this has had a big effect on the ecosystem and other animals. For example, other animals at the top of the food chain, such as lions and sharks, evolved slowly over millions of years, which allowed the ecosystem to develop checks and balances. However, when humans ascended to the top so quickly, the ecosystem was not given time to adjust, and this has led to many problems, particularly concerning historical calamities like wars. Fire was used by early humans to cook their food, warm themselves, and create a weapon against animals. Fire also allowed humans to expand their territory and develop bigger brains. Some scholars believe there is a direct link between the advent of cooking, the shortening of the human intestinal tract, and the growth of the human brain. Since long intestines and large brains are both massive energy consumers, it's hard to have both. By shortening the intestines and decreasing their energy consumption, cooking inadvertently opened the way to the jumbo brains of Neanderthals and Sapiens. Tree of Knowledge. The cognitive revolution is the period starting about 70,000 years ago when Sapiens started doing really special things, like settling in Australia and carving the Stadol lion man. It's believed that this happened because of a change in the structure of their brains, which allowed them to think in unprecedented ways and communicate using a new language. The gossip theory is the idea that human language evolved to facilitate gossiping. The theory suggests that because humans can communicate about things that don't exist, this ability allows for greater cooperation in large numbers. Legends, myths, gods and religions appeared for the first time with the cognitive revolution. Many animals and human species could previously say, "Careful. A lion." Thanks to the cognitive revolution, Homo sapiens acquired the ability to say, "The lion is the guardian spirit of our tribe." This ability to speak about fiction is the most unique feature of the sapiens language. You could never convince a monkey to give you a banana by promising him limitless bananas after death in monkey heaven. Fiction can be dangerously misleading or distracting. But fiction has enabled us not merely to imagine things, but to do so collectively. We can weave common myths such as gods and myths of modern states. Such myths give sapiens the unprecedented ability to cooperate flexibly in large numbers. Ants and bees can also work together in huge numbers, but they do so in a very rigid manner and only with close relatives. Wolves and chimpanzees cooperate far more flexibly than ants, but they can do so only with small numbers of other individuals that they know intimately. Sapiens can cooperate in extremely flexible ways with countless numbers of strangers. That's why sapiens rule the world. Chimpanzees live in small, close-knit social groups. Alpha males in these groups typically maintain social order and dominate interactions with others, although less benevolently, by monopolizing food and mating opportunities. But once the threshold of 150 is crossed, things can no longer work that way. You cannot run a division with thousands of soldiers the same way you run a platoon. Any large-scale human cooperation, whether a modern state, a medieval church, an ancient city or an archaic tribe, is rooted in common myths that exist only in people's collective imagination. The ability of humans to create and share stories enabled them to cooperate and form large societies. Stories can be changed quickly, and this has enabled humans to change their behavior rapidly and to outstrip other animals in their ability to cooperate. The cognitive revolution is when humans began to use stories to explain their history instead of just biological explanations. Until this point, all human activity was within the realm of biology. From the cognitive revolution onwards, historical narratives replaced biological theories as our primary means of explaining the development of Homo sapiens. Pre-agriculture world. Evolutionary psychology is the study of how human behavior is shaped by our evolutionary past. It is believed that many of our social and psychological characteristics were shaped during the long pre-agricultural era, specifically during the hunter-gatherer era. For example, today we often gorge on high-calorie food that is doing little good to our bodies, but this is because our DNA still thinks we are in the savannah, where food was in short supply and high-calorie sweets were rare. The pre-agricultural world was dominated by humans, who lived in small bands of around a dozen or so individuals. Dogs were the only domesticated animal, and they were used for hunting, fighting, and as an alarm system against wild beasts. Sapiens and dogs co-evolved over time, and today humans have a deeper bond with dogs than any other animal. Most sapiens bands traveled the roads, and occasionally ventured out of their territory to explore new lands. Foraging was the main activity of sapiens, and it provided most of their calories and raw materials. The average ancient sapiens had a much broader and deeper knowledge of their surroundings than most of their modern descendants. The forager society is the original affluent society. These societies had a relatively short working week, a varied diet, and no need for things such as agriculture or industry. However, their world could still be harsh and unforgiving, as periods of want and hardship were not uncommon. Also, child mortality was high and accidents could be life-threatening. Most people probably enjoyed the close intimacy of the roaming band, but those unfortunates who incurred the hostility or mockery of their fellow band members probably suffered terribly. The foragers of the past were animists, which means that they believed in spirits that inhabited everything around them. These spirits could be benevolent or malevolent and could be communicated with through speech, song, dance, and ceremony. The foragers also had a spiritual world that was separate from the political world. Many anthropologists believe that war and violence began with the agricultural revolution when people started to accumulate private property, while others maintain that the world of the ancient foragers was exceptionally cruel and violent. The depressing findings from the Danube Valley suggest that the ancient foragers were as violent as the 20th century. Killing animals. The first humans to settle in Australia were able to do so because they had developed seafaring capabilities. They were able to cross sea channels and colonize the island without having to adapt completely to a new ecosystem. Following their settlement, the first humans to Australia caused several changes to the Australian ecosystem that led to the extinction of many large and extinct animals. Some scholars try to exonerate our species, placing the blame on the vagaries of the climate, the usual scapegoat in such cases. However, 3 pieces of evidence weaken this climate alibi. First, Australia's climate changed 45,000 years ago, but it wasn't a very remarkable upheaval. Second, when climate change causes mass extinctions, sea creatures are usually hit as hard as land dwellers. And third, mass extinctions resembling the archetypal Australian decimation have occurred again and again in the ensuing millennia, whenever people settled another part of the outer world. Homo sapiens' guilt is irrefutable. The first significant sign that humans were on Earth was when the Australian megafauna went extinct. This was followed by a much larger ecological disaster in America, where only Homo sapiens settled. This was the first and only human species to reach North America. The first Americans arrived on foot, which was much harder than the sea passage to Australia. They had to learn how to survive in the extreme Arctic conditions of northern Siberia and withstand the cold winter sun. They also had to learn to make snowshoes and thermal clothing to cope with the cold. As their survival skills improved, they ventured deeper and deeper into the frozen regions. Eventually, they spread across the continent. However, by 10,000 BC, most of the unique animal species in America had gone extinct. It is believed that this was due to human activity, specifically the hunting of mammoths and other large mammals. How wheat dominated us. The agricultural revolution was when humans started to devote almost all their time and effort to manipulating the lives of a few animal and plant species to provide themselves with more food. This transition began around 9000 BC in the hill country of southeastern Turkey, western Iran, and the Levant. The agricultural revolution was history's biggest fraud. Who was responsible? Neither kings, priests, nor merchants. The culprits were a handful of plant species, including wheat, rice and potatoes. These plants domesticated Homo sapiens, rather than vice versa. Wheat became very successful because it was able to manipulate humans to its advantage. It offered food security, but it also led to many ailments for humans such as slipped discs, arthritis and hernias. And it was not easy to farm. The agricultural revolution allowed humans to create more food and spread it across the globe. However, this revolution came with a cost. Humans became able to conquer other areas and spread their genes, but at a great cost to themselves. The gradual rise of farming was a gradual process that involved just a few small changes in day-to-day life. For example, early humans would gather mushrooms, nuts, and deer meat, and didn't all of a sudden settle down and start farming. It started with a small change, such as people gathering these items and bringing them back to their campsites for processing. Gradually, over time, more and more people started to eat wheat and other cereals, which allowed the wheat to spread and grow. When humans started to burn down forests and thickets, this also helped wheat. When people started to cultivate cereals, they also began to build stone houses and granaries. As time went on, the gradual rise of farming led to the development of permanent villages. However, the farmers did not foresee all of the negative consequences of their decisions. For example, they did not foresee that their increased dependence on a single source of food would eventually lead to the development of food shortages and diseases. The divine intervention. The agricultural revolution was a time when humans began to change crops and farming to create a more comfortable way of life. Scientists originally thought that the revolution was caused by food shortages or demographic pressures, but it was caused by other aspirations that the people had. Stonehenge and other monumental structures from this period were built by a developed agricultural society, and this proves that the people had an ideological or religious system that was able to sustain such efforts. Humans and grains made a deal in which humans would get food and grains would get protection. They changed the constitution of the herds that they preyed on, turning them into domesticated animals. This deal allowed humans to spread around the world and have a steady food supply. However, over time the practices of domestication became brutal and oppressive, with animals being kept in captivity, tortured, and slaughtered at an early age. The agricultural revolution was a time when humans changed how they raised and used animals. Before the revolution, animals were typically taken care of by their shepherd owners, but with the revolution, animals were taken care of by farmers who owned them. This change led to many problems because the animals could no longer run away, could not see, and were constantly pregnant. The agricultural revolution was a turning point in human history when people began to farm and settle down. Before this, people were nomadic hunters and gatherers. Farming enabled the population to increase rapidly, and by the 1st century AD, only 1 to 2 million foragers remained, compared to 250 million farmers. This revolution changed how people lived and operated, and led to the development of civilizations and societies. Agriculture made the future more important than it had ever been before, leading to the development of large-scale political and social systems. Foragers lived in the present and didn't worry about the future, while farmers were always conscious of the future and worked to serve it. The stress of farming led to the development of large-scale political and social systems, which in turn allowed elites to accumulate wealth and power. An imagined order is a social system that people believe in, but it is not a real thing. The stability of an imagined order depends on the belief of its citizens, and if those citizens stop believing in it, it can collapse. Societies that have an imagined order often use violence to keep it in place, but it is not sustainable without the belief of the elites. Origin of writing. Humans have a limited capacity to store large amounts of information, and our brains die after a short amount of time. Additionally, humans are adapted to process a certain type of information, such as remembering the shapes, qualities, and behavior patterns of plants and animals, and we are not adapted to process large amounts of information about other things, such as laws, customs, procedures, and manners. This mental limitation severely constrained the size and complexity of human collectives. When the number of people and property in a particular society crossed a critical threshold, it became necessary to store and process large amounts of mathematical data. Since the human brain could not do it, the system collapsed. For thousands of years after the agricultural revolution, human social networks remained relatively small and simple. Between the years 3500 BC and 3000 BC, some unknown Sumerian geniuses invented a system for storing and processing information outside their brains. This is called writing. There is no justice. During the agricultural revolution, humans organized themselves into mass cooperation networks to survive and thrive. However, because humans lacked the instincts necessary to sustain these networks, they invented imagined orders and devised scripts to fill the gaps left by their biological inheritance. These imagined orders were often discriminatory and unfair and established hierarchies between people based on their wealth, race, and sex. Despite its proclamation of the equality of all men, the American order established in 1776 upheld the hierarchy of wealth and created distinctions between free persons and slaves, whites and blacks, and rich and poor. Origin of culture. After the agriculture revolution, human societies grew ever larger and more complex, while the imagined constructs sustaining the social order also became more elaborate. Myths and functions accustomed people, nearly from the moment of birth, to think in certain ways, to behave per certain standards, to want certain things, and to observe certain rules. They thereby created artificial instincts that enabled millions of strangers to cooperate effectively. This network of artificial instincts is called culture. Human cultures are constantly in flux and are constantly evolving. This is because, over time, complex civilizations form from smaller, simpler ones. This process is gradual and often occurs without any noticeable pattern. History has a direction, however, and over time, the world is gradually converging into a few larger, more complex cultures. Origin of money. Hunter-gatherers had no money, but they traded goods and services through an economy of favors and obligations. With the agricultural revolution, cities and kingdoms began to form, and the specialization of various professions became necessary. This led to the development of money, which enabled large-scale trade between specialists. Money was created many times in many places. Its development required no technological breakthroughs, it was a purely mental revolution. It involved the creation of a new intersubjective reality that exists solely in people's shared imagination. Because money can convert, store and transport wealth easily and cheaply, it made a vital contribution to the appearance of complex commercial networks and dynamic markets. Without money, commercial networks and markets would have been doomed to remain very limited in their size, complexity and dynamism. Empires. The first empire about which we have definitive information was the Akkadian Empire of Sargon the Great, c. 2250 BC. Sargon began his career as the king of Kish, a small city-state in Mesopotamia. Within a few decades, he managed to conquer not only all other Mesopotamian city-states but also large territories outside the Mesopotamian heartland. However, this empire did not last long. Finally, the author talks about the global empire, which is being forged before our eyes. It is not governed by any particular state or ethnic group. Much like the late Roman Empire, it is ruled by a multi-ethnic elite and is held together by a common culture and common interests. Throughout the world, more and more entrepreneurs, engineers, experts, scholars, lawyers, and managers are called to join the empire. They must ponder whether to answer the imperial call or to remain loyal to their state and their people. More and more choose the empire. End of the summary. Thanks for listening.